Welcome back to our Intro to Typography series on type design. In the first video, we set up our document, which you see here. I saved that as document setup.ai, and that'll be hosted on D2L. In this video, we're going to cover designing a basic letter and turning strokes into shapes and merging those shapes, and a little bit of talk about using non-destructive methods so that you can go back and make changes easily without destroying your work as you save. And then also setting a space box or reserved space for a letter. So those are a few things that we're going to cover here, but we'll go one at a time. First, this layer is all document setup, so I'm just going to lock this layer and create a new layer so that I'm working on a new layer for my first letter. I'm going to start nice and simple. The first letter I'm going to build is a letter H. I'm just going to use the pen tool. You could use a line tool or rectangle tool to make similar changes here, but yeah, I want to stick with pen tool because that's something you're going to need to use a lot. So for capital H, which is a pretty basic letter form, I'm going to start at the cap height, and I'm going to draw, I'm going to draw straight down, holding Shift to constrain to a vertical line to the baseline. Now you'll notice I have no stroke right now. I'm just going to select the selection tool, and that'll end my line. Right now there's a fill, which makes no sense because it's not a closed shape, and there's no stroke. So I'm going to switch this and give myself a stroke, and you'll notice over here that I have 1 point of stroke. 1 point is not enough. So I'm going to come in here and go 10 points, and I think that's still not enough. I'm going to go 15. Okay, so this is subjective. I'm just designing on the fly here, of course. So I'm going to move this over a little bit just for my own reference. So now I have a vertical stem for my H. If I want a copy of that, I can just hold Alt and drag out another copy. Nice and easy. You can also copy and paste with Command-C, Command-V, or Control-C, Control-V if you're on Windows. However you want to do it, that's fine. You could even just draw the stroke again since it's a pretty simple one. Now, I also have a horizontal line that I need to make, of course, so I'm going to go back to my pen tool, which is P for the shortcut. And I'm going to start from the center, this little intersection, the center of my left stroke, and I'm going to draw all the way over to the center of my right stroke, and it should auto-snap to my line here. I'm not holding Shift to constrain, but if you're not auto-snapping, you can hold Shift to constrain and get a horizontal line. Now you'll notice the cross height is slightly above center. That's to make the H feel a little more balanced. In this case, I think it's actually a little bit too far above center, so I'm going to make a quick edit here, just a stylistic edit. I need to unlock my setup layer, and I'm going to move my cross height down a little bit, because I think it's too much. And then I'm going to take this bar that I just made, and I'm going to move it down as well. I think I did both of those just a little too much, so I'm going to nudge them up here. Yep. Good. So that's about what I'm looking for. It feels like halfway, but it is actually a tiny bit above halfway, so the H feels stable here. So I'm going to go ahead and lock my setup layer again. I like to lock layers that I'm not using. It just keeps my workspace clean, and I don't make accidental collisions as I'm working. You can do what you want. But so now I have these three strokes, right? And I've mentioned that what we need to turn in is actually single or very few shapes for each letter, not stroked lines, right? We need to make sure we're not turning in lines with strokes. And one of the reasons for that is that if I were to scale this, you'll notice that the stroke doesn't scale, right? So what we actually want to create when we create a font is a letter form that when it scales, the entire thickness of the letter scales as well. And strokes don't perform that way. So if we create shapes, they will perform that way. Plus, if people go back to edit a shape, they'll get what they expect. If they see a shape, it's exactly what they would expect. There's a path around that shape. So one of the methods that I'll show right here is for turning strokes into shapes. And it's pretty simple. Any of the strokes that you have selected, any of the paths that you have selected, if you go to Object, Path, Outline Stroke, that'll create an outline around each of those strokes. So now instead of 3 lines with stroke applied, we have 3 rectangles that are overlapping, right? So this is great. Now I have 3 shapes, and I'm closer to what I need that is 1 shape, right? So there are a couple of ways to get these into 1 shape, but I've recognized that I've actually already done something that is maybe non-reparable. So I don't want to damage the information that I'm working with in a way that I can't get back to it. With the letter H, it's pretty easy to rebuild. I'm going to hit Command Z and just get back a step here, because foreseeably in the future, I might actually want to, like, I don't know, move one of these strokes or bend one of these strokes or something. Probably not with the letter H, but whatever. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to take these three strokes, I'm going to hit Control C or Command C and F, Command F, and paste them. So now I have copies of everything, right? So if I hide the three that I've selected, you'll notice everything's still there because I've got copies. So I'm going to reselect those three, and actually I'm going to take from the bottom here. I'm selecting the bottom three, and I'm going to lock them, and I'm going to hide them. So this is nice because now no matter what I do to these top strokes, I have the core lines and their strokes applied in a very malleable, workable fashion. So if I want to change this letter, I can delete all the other shapes I've been messing with willy-nilly, and I haven't deleted the core of my letter that I need for designing in the future. So this is just a method for staying non-destructive, right? So if I come back here and I select this top section now, which you can, since everything else is locked, you can just drag select as well. Now I'm going to go back, Object, Path, Outline Stroke, and now I've got my three shapes that are overlapping. Now they're three shapes, and they need to be one shape when I'm going to finish my letter off here, right? Now I haven't done any optical corrections to that. I'm not going to mess with optical corrections until a little bit later in this series, but realize that you wouldn't want to finalize all your letters until you've actually done optical corrections, because again, it's destructive to finalize your letters, right? So as part of your process, you would revisit all your letters, do your optical corrections, then come do these steps to actually merge the shapes down into the fewest number of shapes possible for each letter. So there are a couple ways that you can merge these shapes. One way that is a pretty simple, straightforward way is to go to Window, Pathfinder, which will get you the Pathfinder palette of tools, and it's over here. So you'll see that there are various different things I can do with shapes, right? Like if I want to keep only the parts of shapes that are overlapping, whatever I have selected, if I click that, it should have kept only these. I think something's wrong here. Yeah, I can subtract shapes one from another. I can just get rid of what's in common. I'm not sure why that wasn't working. That really should be. And the one that we're actually going to use the most here is Unite, and that is going to just merge all the shapes into one. So now if you look in your layers, you've got one shape that is your H, and it's got a bunch of points on it, right? So if I select here, it's actually selecting all these anchor points that are all the corners, and I've got one nice H here. I have one more thing that I want to show, and that is deciding the amount of space that a letter H should take on the page. So if you think about a letter H that you would have in like a cast or metal type, it has a certain amount of space that its slug or its block takes up, right, when you're setting up type. We're going to do a similar thing in the digital space, even though digital is a little more flexible than that, which is great. We're not actually going to adhere to sort of digital norms, right? We're going to tip our hats to the old way and reserve some space for this letter, because even though we're in a digital workspace, we actually still need to reserve some space for this letter at default, and then people can edit that with kerning or tracking or custom kerning pairs in the font and so forth. So this is actually something that you'll need to do for your final. You're going to need to make space boxes for each letter. So I'd recommend picking some other color. You can pick something wild, probably not. Or if if you're like me and you're boring, you could pick something really gray and droll. Whatever you want, just so long as it's different, that's the important thing, so I can tell what color you're using for your space boxes. So when you create a space box for something symmetrical like this letter H, you could drag a box that is, I'm going to move it under the H layer so we can see both, that is the same width as the H, right? Because this is symmetrical, so we're probably going to want the same amount of space to the left of an H that we would have to the right of an H. We could edit that later, but for now we'll just start with the basics. So I'm going to go ahead and drag this to the top and bottom of my artboard. You can put this wherever you want, but this just kind of mimics the old world type slug size of being quite a bit taller than your actual letter. And then to size this so that you get an equal amount more on each side, you can hold Alt and just drag one of the handles of this rectangle and it'll drag the other one out in equal measure. And then you have this nice space box. So the idea being that another letter next to this one would also have a space box, and where those two space boxes hit each other, that's what defines the amount of space that would come between these letters. So another H would start right about here, because there'd be another space box, and those would butt up against each other. And you'll need to do this for every letter. Some letters will need more space on the left, more space on the right, more space on both sides, or less space on both sides, just depending on the form of the letter and how much visual weight it carries in its figure-ground relationship, right? The black versus the white space. If you have a letter that has a lot of black in its space, you might need a little bit more space around it to compensate. And if you have a letter that has a lot of white space in its form, you might need a little bit less space around it so that other letters kind of hug in tighter and make it feel like a middle gray or part of the typeface more appropriately. So in this video we covered turning strokes into shapes, merging those shapes down, some methods for being non-destructive when we design type, and a method for creating a space box for defining the amount of space that a letter will take up. There will be some other videos on using the pen tool and some other stuff here coming in the future, but this is part 2, so stay tuned.